I'll never forget when I was 14 years old watching the great basketball star Michael Jordan playing golf. I grew up outside of Chicago, and in the summers I caddied at a local golf course. And even though it was the mid-'80s, it was considered normal that no blacks and no Jews were allowed to be members of the country club. But occasionally on a weekday, when there weren't too many people on the course, Michael Jordan would be allowed to come out and play with a couple of the members of the country club. Keep in mind that Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player, maybe the greatest athlete of all times, was in his prime in the mid-'80s. But despite his wealth, his education, his fame, and his love of golf, he could not have joined that country club or any number of many of country clubs throughout the Chicago area. I was reminded of this story because yesterday was the anniversary of the official desegregation of the PGA, the Professional Golf Association, which happened in January 19th, 1961. Now, even so, for the next 2 decades, I've read that the best black golfers often had to change their clothes in the parking lot because they weren't allowed into the locker rooms of some of the clubs where they played. Now, it wasn't until 1990 that under the pressure of advertisers like American Airlines and IBM, that the PGA made a rule that they would no longer allow a country club to host a tournament if they did not have any black members. The following year, many elite country clubs across the country gave honorary memberships to well-known black members of the community, to like one well-known black member of the community, in order to preserve their right to host a PGA championship or tournament. As a matter of fact, it was in 1991 that Southern Hills Country Club here in Tulsa gave an invitation, an honorary membership to author Clifton Talbert, so that that club could accept the invitation to host the PGA Championship in 1994. Now, often when we talk about civil rights and we celebrate Martin Luther King holiday, we often think about 40, 50 years ago. But racism continued to plague our nation and continues to for many years, long after Martin Luther King's dream. A few months ago, I preached a sermon. You may recall it was called Hidden America. In the sermon, I challenged the conventional wisdom in this city about why the river tax vote failed 9-1 in North Tulsa, where much of Tulsa's black community resides. I never imagined the response that sermon would get outside of this church. People from many walks of life in Tulsa have come up to me in the past couple of months and said that they've read it, they've been sent it, some people said multiple copies have been emailed to them. And Reverend Ray Owens, a Baptist minister here in Tulsa, assigned the sermon to his entire class at Phillips Theological Seminary. And the editors of Oklahoma Today magazine read that sermon and afterward approached me about writing a piece for their magazine on the elements of effective preaching. People started asking me, what am I going to do next to encourage this conversation, this very important conversation on race in Tulsa? I wasn't sure what to do or where to go, so I approached some of my older colleagues in this community who've been doing this kind of work for decades. And I found that many of them were discouraged about the prospects of creating racial harmony in Tulsa. From white leaders, I heard that they had put on many events and forums over the last couple of decades that had, by and large, black leaders did not attend. And they were very discouraged about that, and that is true. And from black leaders I talked to, I heard that they were tired of endless meetings and forums that made the participants feel good that they were doing something, but that led to no real significant change. Then I got the good sense to ask one of our church members, Nancy McDonald, what she thought. She said, I don't think you can start with the older generation of leaders in Tulsa. They may want change, but they're burned out by too many disappointing experiences. She said, why don't you start by asking the people who were among the first youth to graduate from Tulsa public schools after legal desegregation? Soon I remembered that there is a second part to Martin Luther King's dream. It began with white children and black children holding hands and playing together on playgrounds across this country. But part two of that dream is that those children on the playground would grow up and become leaders together and change the face of this nation and the cities that they live in. Well, Nancy helped me realize that that historic moment has come. Those children who learned to play together on the playgrounds of Tulsa public schools in the 1970s are now doctors, lawyers, politicians, social service providers, firefighters, educators, business people, and ministers, and every kind of profession we can imagine here in this city. Many are parents who now have their own school-age children in the school system right now. The time has come for those young people to lead the way to a new and different kind of Tulsa. These young leaders represent a new generation of North Americans, which these young people who are in front of the sanctuary represent as well. These young people grew up with a completely different upbringing regarding what they understood and were taught about race and the value of every human person. So in December, with the help of Nancy McDonald and Herb Beatty and Julius Pegues from this community, I called together 40 Tulsa leaders, both black and white, most of whom had graduated from Booker T. Washington shortly after the first classes to graduate after the integration of that school, after those marches that we watched on the screen earlier. It was amazing. It was amazing because despite the ethnic and racial diversity in the room, and despite the controversial issues that we were talking about, there was a rare ease in the conversation. There was a lot of humor and affection in the discussion, and there was a clear drive to step up to create positive change in Tulsa. The main things we discussed were education, economic development, and race relations. What was inspiring was that the conversation was not the usual us and them conversation. These leaders talked in terms of we. They talked about our city, our schools, and our future. They were telling what could be called the we story. So much of human history is the story about the conflict between us and them, between Protestants and Catholics, Muslims and Jews, North and South. But these people were thinking in terms of we. The group came up with a mission to work for the equity and excellence and the quality of life of all Tulsans. The group chose the name We because we're focused on telling the we story for a united Tulsa. The name We is spelled with a small w and a large E, because the emphasis is on the E, on equity, excellence, education, and economic development. Our first public event will be a forum a week from tomorrow, on Monday night, for the candidates running for Tulsa Public School Board. It'll be here at All Souls at 7 p.m. Let's be honest, Tulsa Public Schools is failing many of our children, especially those in the poorer areas of this city. And yet, with a school board election next month, there's no public forum set up to hear for parents and citizens to hear and question the candidates about what they're planning to do, what are the next steps. You know, before there at least used to be candidate forums set up where people could engage with those who are running for these important positions. It's time that people from all areas of Tulsa stand together again and hold our public officials accountable about our failing schools. I believe that this new multiracial group of leaders has enormous moral authority. They love Tulsa. They are respected in their own rights professionally here in Tulsa, and they are the product of the best of Tulsa public education. As these leaders develop a positive message to improve and unite this city, I believe that their brand of optimism, coupled with activism and accountability, will become contagious. It's time for a common voice in this city that transcends race and social class.